What I thought we would do is start out, Melanie and I will introduce ourselves and what we do in the community. I have a couple just kind of like high-level ETL resources I thought I would share with you, and I'll show those to you guys. And then I thought we would just kind of open up the discussion and see where it takes us. All right, Melanie, do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. My name is Melanie Philofsky, and I've been with the OHDSI community for 6 years. I'm highly involved. I lead the Electronic Health Record Working Group, and I'm an active member of the CDM vocab group, THEMIS, the OHDSI Symposium Scientific Review Committee, and I participate in many other work groups. I have experience as a data and business analyst, and I do some cohort design and support study execution. So my focus has mainly been with EHR data. I have some exposure to claims and clinical trials. And that's me. Claire?
Yes, so I am obviously an involved member of the OHDSI community as well. So I lead the CDM and vocabulary working group that Melanie was talking about, and I lead the development of the data quality dashboard tool, which is highly integrated into the ETL process. And then as far as my day job at Janssen, I help to manage the process by which we get all of our data assets from their native format to CDM as they come into us. So we go through the ETL process quite regularly, and we have claims assets and EHR assets, and then also assets around the world, like from the UK and Japan, France and Germany and Australia. So I do see some ETL veterans on here, like Erica. So Erica's here. She's actually been leading the Eden Rapid Collaboration Call. So she's been helping data partners all around Europe map their data into the CDM. So I think she'll give us a lot of good insights as well. And I know Anthony has done a lot of ETLs, and Alan and a couple other folks that I see on the call so far. So let me just share with you before we open up for questions. I just want to just share with you guys a couple of resources in case you didn't know about them. So I'm showing you right here the Eden Academy. So this is the Eden Academy ETL course. If you need just from bottom up information about how to get started with an ETL, this is a great place to go. Again, I'm going to put all these links in the chat, but just like for a great overview, this is a good place to start. And then we also have an ETL chapter in the Book of OHDSI, which again goes through all of those steps, kind of one by one, and takes you through how you can start an ETL. So both of those are really great resources. And then just for some level setting, for those, if you haven't done an ETL or are kind of new to the process, let's see if I can make this a good size there. So just as a reminder, so when we talk about ETL process, we're talking about the process of extract, transform, and load. So getting from your source database all the way to your CDM database, and getting it to the point where you are happy with it, you're confident in your data, that it is of high quality, and that you've implemented the CDM standards correctly. So that's what this nice little Pusheen image that Erica put together, that's what this is showing. All right, so that's about it, just some quick overview. I guess let's just open it up for questions. Did anybody come with like a burning ETL or even vocabulary question?
Hey Claire, it's Karthik. I had a question. It was actually, it came up in the previous meeting I was in today about history of concepts. And this really a question for like more of a themis type question and a vocabulary question. So, the idea is, we have like history of like, let's say glaucoma, for example, and there is a V code in ICD, translates to SNOMED, and we have a nice kind of pre-coordinated mapping there. And that ends up in the observation table, and it gets in there as an observation concept ID. The question that came to us, or to me, and this is from the All of Us group, was if they wanted, if it would be wise to split it up. Meaning what they were finding is they have surveys where there's family history of, or history of, or even mother's history of. So they've introduced these other kind of family related conditions or history concepts. And so they were thinking of, in order for them to standardize how a researcher would look at kind of familial relationships of saying, okay, did you have any history within your family of this particular disease? Would it make sense to have it post-coordinated with, meaning, well, you have the history of condition in the observation concept ID, and then glaucoma in the value as concept ID. So the pre-coordination gets lost, but there's consistency in how you would look at the data. And granted, they're combining surveys into this, and that's why it models well for surveys, for example. But it does bring up that question of, when we start looking at different data streams, how do we harmonize the data so that we're not, creating variations of how we capture history of, right? So should there be a standard way? And there are a lot of cases, at least in AOU, and maybe there's other cases where there isn't a pre-coordinated history of condition, and so you end up splitting it anyway. And so then there's a inconsistency of how you would like query the observation table. And so should we come up with a standardized way of saying, hey, this is for all history of, irrespective of the pre-coordinated value, that shouldn't be standard. The standard should be split it up. Just a kind of question to pose. I know it's more work on the ETL side, and so there is issues there, but just wanted to get people's thoughts. Or if that made sense.
Yeah.
So this is something that has been discussed within the Odyssey community, and I think that was the link that Claire posted before. There haven't been any conventions around this. There are terms that are sometimes pre-coordinated, and then sometimes there's family history you pull from your data. It says family or personal history of, and then appendicitis, stuff like that. But there's currently no conventions around it. I do believe that if this is something people want to study at the network level, that some different ideas should be brought to the CDM work group.
Erica, did you have a comment? And I think you're on mute, by the way. Oh, still on mute. There you go.
Maybe I shouldn't click it 5 times. But I like this kind of idea that Karthik is presenting, that the consistency of it. So even if it's pre-coordinated, but you're right, it's kind of, when it comes if just thinking from US claims perspective, if it happens to come across as a diagnosis, you'd have to have this kind of additional logic to, well, I guess it would already be going to the observation table anyway. But you'd have to have this additional logic of like not only knowing, okay, where did the domain go? Oh, and you're one of these special ones.
Right.
Now I need to do something different to make you this history of.
Right. There's that complexity there. And I looked in the SNOMED, like there's no easy flag, right? Like you have to go up 1 or 2 levels in like,
yeah, there's not a good grouping. Like you can't say like, here, if you're in this group, you're a history of.
Yeah, I had it earlier. There is a like history of, but it's like several levels above that pre-coordinated value. It's not like, oh, go up 1 value. I think it's like going up 2, maybe even 3. Let me see if I can find that example that I was looking at.
Yeah, so in the chat, I sent a forum post where we talked about this last year, because I ran into this with with the CPRD data set where, it's like crazy longitudinal data in the UK, and like CPRD puts time bounds, like they create their own observation period, but they get a bunch of data that is outside of that observation period, and it can be like from 1975 or something like that, and you still want that, but it is patient reported, and it might be something like patient reports broken arm in 1975 or something. So I kind of came back to this idea as well of like breaking that pre-coordination. And that's what this post is going through, is like, what are the scenarios where we would see that? So in my case, it was like people with information outside of the observation period. But in terms of US claims, we do sometimes get like those workplace surveys where we would probably put this as history of rather than, an actual condition. It's more of like a history of, heart disease or something. But I like this idea better because then you get the wider range of concepts, like condition concepts or something like that. And then you can kind of group them all on that history of observation concept ID.
Right. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, the cons that I see really is the ETL work, and for some reason I can't see the chat, but the other piece is like the tooling, like how would we create a concept set that would work? Right now it's easy enough. It's a pre-coordinated value, you put it in and it works. But it's something that, as the All of Us program's trying to incorporate surveys, it is something that's come up, and I think the more they think about it, the more they're leaning towards standardizing it in this way. And so I wanted to get people's input. I mean, from my point of view, from an ETL point of view, it is definitely extra work, but I feel like in some ways, from an analytics way, it does harmonize the different data streams. And I don't know if that's the case, like in Eden, Erica, if they have surveys and stuff like that, they plan to incorporate, but
I actually think if you're in the survey world, you're already in an easier place to control it. So correct. You can say like, oh, this data is coming in a survey. I'm just going to say like, okay, if I see these conditions, like they're going to just go in as history of. I think it's harder when you have like a diagnosis that's the pre-coordinated to then additionally do this logic. So I think for you, Karthik, like you would go with I guess technically the recommended approach by Themis.
Yeah, and Mark, did you want to say something? I saw your hand was up.
Not related to this. So when this is done,
okay.
Yeah.
So I actually think so. Erica makes a good point because there are some where like a source code will actually map into that history of, like I'm looking at history of anemia right now. So there might be a source code that actually maps into that history of like an ICD-9 or ICD-10. And then you'd have like that survey information where you'd map in a different way, which I actually think you could start to step up your, like you could do like incremental versions of your ETL. So you can start by just doing all your normal mappings, even if they map to a history of concept. And then if you have a second data stream of a survey, you could then apply this new convention to it. So I actually don't think it would be that big of an issue. What I would want to know, I always think about what is it called? Feature extraction. So when we implement a new convention or new table, how does that going to then impact feature extraction? Because that's employed in our propensity score matching, right? And in our patient level prediction. So what I don't know, and we might want to maybe reach out to Martine or Jenna, is when feature extraction looks at the observation table, does it take into account both the observation concept ID and the value as concept ID? Or does it only look at the observation concept ID? Does anybody know?
I'm gonna guess it doesn't look at value as concept ID.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well.
Because then what you'd get is a bunch of like, you might get a covariate that just says history of, because a bunch of people have that history of, and it's not taken into account.
That's
like the
could be indicative of age, basically.
Yeah. So that might be something like, if we did implement this, which I actually think is a very good idea and makes sense, that we may want to think about the downstream effects of, would you then see a covariate at history of, because everybody's suddenly getting that observation concept ID.
So I was eating some bread, so I can answer. But what was the
Oh, Jenna, you are here. So I was wondering about feature extraction. So we're talking about this idea of a history of. So Karthik's talking about someone fills out a survey that says, yes, I have, say, heart failure. And so instead of finding a concept that says history of heart failure, we'd like to save it actually in the observation table with the observation concept ID as history of, and then the value as concept ID as heart failure. But I like to think, I was thinking downstream about feature extraction. And do you know if feature extraction, when it looks at the observation table, does it only look at the observation concept ID, or does it look at the combination of observation concept ID and value as concept ID?
So it won't look at the value for observation.
Well, okay.
Measurements, it can look at the values, but like we don't use that often, and
Okay.
it's not really been kind of optimized. So it's quite like, it's basically imputing 0 for people, for example, with measurements. So, but if you changed it to have the situation where you would have like this observation is a history of, and then the value is kind of what the history is, I think it'd be quite easy edit to feature extraction to kind of incorporate that. So I wouldn't be put off by that. It would be not too difficult to fix.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear.
And it is available in Atlas, the value as concept ID. So if you're like anybody that has had a diagnosis of cancer plus a history of cancer, right? You want to eliminate anybody that's had cancer before, you are able to do that in Atlas. And you keep the granularity with the value as concept ID, which is huge.
That's a really good point, because if you look at just cancer or, primary malignant neoplasm, I don't actually think it has that. It doesn't have that history of cancer as one of its children. So that's actually a really good point, Melanie. Yeah. So I like this idea, and I think it's a really good convention we could recommend. Let's see. I see another hand up.
Oh, I'll get back to what my question was. It's more of as looking for advice. So we have an ETL that's gone through various hands, and we're kind of at the finish line, but still trying to figure out. We're going to bring some help in to do this, but But we source from EDW that sources from the source systems. And what we've discovered is the EDW changes. And so then that goes over to the ETL. So we have to create lookup tables and corrections for the changing EDW. But we'll figure that out through some data governance or master data management or something. But the hospital was on Allscripts and they're moving to Epic over the course of the next 2 years. So we don't want to lose what we have. We'll keep that in place. But starting with a fresh Epic install, we want to be ready on day one to say, turn on the ETL, right? So that we can just keep going. Any recommendations for how to start that process? But we'll be on a committee with somebody that talks about uses for research and how to keep that going. But
so I have two thoughts.
Yeah.
One question, one potential recommendation. Now, if I understand correctly, and those who use Epic more, please let me know. Now, Epic is highly customizable, right? So every installation may look a little bit different.
Yep.
So if you try to take an Epic ETL from somebody else, it might not work, right?
Right.
Okay. With that being said, which I thought was the case, I don't know if he's here today, Dr. Paul Nagy at Johns Hopkins, and I can.
Yeah, actually.
Okay.
Something else.
Great. Yeah. So he actually, I believe they have Epic, and he just completed an ETL of their Epic system. So I don't know how much of it you could reuse, but it might be a jumping off point. And he is very, as you know, very open to collaboration.
Oh, yeah.
And I know he did some stuff working with flow sheets, where he's been mapping some flow sheets and a lot of that information. So I would bet he would either be able to give you a jumping off point or give you some good pointers about how to implement an ETL in Epic.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. He's actually works with this tool called Leaf that he sits on top of the OMOP model, which allows for easy cohort discovery. And we have a meeting about once a month that talks about that. So this is a good loop around kind of thing. And my thought was, go through the process and see how are they setting up and what's going to flow into it ahead of time, because there'll be sample data and things like that, right? So use that ahead of time. And then just turn it on for a month and make sure it all kind of works the way you thought it would go, and then refine from there.
Yeah, if you have access to it, I think that's a good. And do you know if you're going to be using Clarity or Caboodle?
I don't know at this stage. I'm at the university side, but we work closely with the hospitals, so we'll get more involved and they're just at the very beginning. This is going to be a 3-year process.
Okay. Yeah, you're pretty early on. And so I would also say, so we've been trying to figure out how to collaborate on Epic ETLs, because Epic is very locked down. So what we've done is, at least in the All of Us program, we've asked sites, and it's only been 2, maybe 3 sites who have posted their ETL code on Epic User Web. It's not the best way to share the code because their environment's not set up for that. But that is where we can post things. So Spectrum Health in Michigan posted their ETL. We at Columbia posted our ETL. So you can get the entire thing. And so you'll see some variations there. That would be also another good start. I know other groups have downloaded our ETL just to figure out how to populate various tables. And our ETL is constantly changing because we went to Epic last year, and we still don't have access to all the tables just because of the various governance. And we're kind of complicated in the sense that our hospital's affiliated to more than one academic institution. So there's other kind of data governance issues around there. But yeah, I think if you were to take that, and if you have access to a POC environment with Clarity, our ETL is off of Clarity. I believe Denver, Melanie, you guys are off of Caboodle, but yeah, depending on what you have access to, or will have access to in a POC environment, you could probably start that and just see if you can populate it using the ETL there.
Okay, great. These are great. Everybody thinks this is great. I mean, I know we're way ahead, but the thing is, I want to take a proposal to the hospital that says, hey, on day one or week one or month one, you will be able to still feed into what you got from the Allscript systems and everything. So this is great stuff. Thanks.
Looks like, and also in the chat, it looks like there's quite a few people. So Robert at OHSU is kind of doing the same thing as you, Mark. Emery as well. Daniel said that you guys are getting started on Epic. So I wonder if it would be helpful, not that we always need a ton more work groups, but I wonder if it'd be helpful to have like an Epic focused group. Or is Melanie, is that more of like your realm in EHR?
So there's the EHR work group, and we do discuss these things. Lots of folks do have Epic and have converted their Epic data, OMOP'd it. There was talk about a year ago, I can't do another work group, but I would be happy to join somebody else's Epic work group. I have a lot of experience with Colorado and then just consulting with other universities and healthcare systems to put your data from Epic, either Clarity or Caboodle, over to the OMOP CDM. There is the Epic user web, but not many people have posted their ETLs there. I'd like to see some community momentum around there because, you know, there's standardization in the OMOP CDM, but we also need to standardize as much as possible from Epic over to the CDM too. So yeah, very supportive of anybody that wants to start that. And I know lots of folks that are doing this, so I can also pull those people in and send out the emails and round up the troops.
This is Roger Carlson from Spectrum Health. We're the ones that posted our pretty much all of our ETL on the Epic user web. And it's there. I would love to have more. I had hoped to have more people looking at it. A lot of people have looked at it. A lot of people are following it, but I haven't gotten any feedback either. You know, I'm sure there are things that could be improved on it, and you know, so I would like to encourage anybody to go ahead and look at that, download it. If you want to talk to me, you know, give me a call or email me, something like that, because I would love to talk about that. We've been involved in the Karthik and I have been involved in the Epic All of Us user group, and it's really difficult to get anybody to contribute or to even talk. I end up talking pretty much every time, as Karthik knows, and I don't know how. Everybody wants to learn how to do it, but nobody wants to put their code out there and possibly be embarrassed by it, or, you know, and nobody's going to do that. I mean, nobody is going to look at your code and say, oh, that's terrible, you're stupid, but everybody feels like that's going to happen. And I don't know how to break out of that. So Sam and I decided that we were just going to put it out there on UserWeb and let people tear it apart, and we really haven't gotten that either. So I don't know what the solution to this is, but I'd love to be involved in something because I know what I'm doing, I could be doing it better just with other people's input.
Well, I think it's, you know, I think it's just like our policy at North Shore University Health System. I don't think we're allowed to post our code because it's just like we've built a custom data warehouse, you know, so like nobody's gonna understand like like our custom, you know, we have custom dimensions and facts, and you know, so we are an Epic institution, but we pull our data from Clarity into our custom data warehouse, so nobody's gonna like understand like if we posted it like like what is this, you know. I mean, we can, you know, like compare our logic, but you know. So that's more our issue.
Yeah, so I want to quick switch topics just to make sure we get time, because I know Lisa has had her hand raised for a while. So it definitely sounds like Epic is a really good topic we can maybe post on the team site, maybe see if there's interest in forming together an Epic focus group. But Lisa, do you want to talk through your question? And I know you've had this like issue in a couple other places.
Well, yeah, actually, I was going to just make two comments. One, I'd be very willing to kind of lead an Epic kind of user group or co-lead it with someone. And I did want, it's funny, I met with Epic probably 7 years ago when I had been involved with OHDSI for probably a few years at that point, and asked them about, was kind of explaining to them what was going on. But, story short, basically, at that point, I did actually, with the Epic set up, not just within the user web, but within the Epic database kind of area, a place where we could post kind of code. And again, that was 7 years ago, and I posted about it on the forum. I'll look to see where some of this other code is posted. Maybe it's posted in that area, but I'm definitely agree that we need to be working there's so many Epic users, we need to be working as a community. And then the only other statement, so I'm happy to kind of help kind of lead that. The only other thing is, just going back to the survey conversation and everything, I just wanted to say that I think going forward too, we're going to have to be very clear about what are surveys that are sent to patients, the real questionnaire type surveys that get delivered to patients and patients do kind of independent of any clinical input. And then there's a lot of assessments that we do within electronic medical records. And, we may loosely call it a questionnaire or a survey, but it's part of the clinical history taking, and it's going to look very much like those surveys that get sent to patients that they do independent of the clinical setting. And we're going to need to be able to distinguish those, because one has probably had a little bit of conversation around it to make sure it kind of makes sense and the patient's getting the right answer down, and one doesn't. And just a good example of that, if someone doesn't know what I'm talking about, I'm an internist and I can ask patients all the time, any history of cancer? And I'm told, yeah, liver cancer. And then I have to say, well, where did it start? And then I hear, well, it started in the colon. So it's colon cancer. So you send a survey to someone, you don't get that insight. So there's a big difference in the quality of information, and we just need to be able to distinguish those.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. All right, I think there's also another Lisa with your hand raised. Do you have a question as well?
Yeah, so I think a big challenge for us at North Shore going live is, we've got almost 3 million patients here, and we doing a full refresh on that size of the population is just not feasible in the future. So I just want to know if there's any institutions that are doing incremental ETL and how they're handling vocabulary updates, because there's just there could be a lot of changes with vocabulary, like concepts can be moved to different domains, concepts could be removed like altogether, they don't become standard anymore. Is there anybody that, like any institution that's established a practice to handle that? And is that something that they'd be willing to share, like on one of these calls, or maybe to all of us call? I brought this up at the meeting last week as well, but since this is a wider audience, maybe there's even more people experience that.
So there was a forum posting just about this, and people discussed what they were doing. Colorado we update our vocabulary once a week, and we run our ETL a couple times a week. We haven't done any testing for domain changes, for vocabulary changes, so we don't do any QA on it at all right now, and we'd be interested to learn from others. So far, knock on wood, it hasn't affected anything. None of our customers have come back saying, oh my gosh, where is this, what happened, things like that. So I guess that's positive, but that's just customer feedback and not QA. So
I will say we are on the opposite spectrum from that. So at J&J, we have, I think, around 13 different assets. And our largest asset has what, Erica, like 120 million patients? Yeah, and that's our largest US claims asset. So what we have found, it actually, vocab updates make a huge difference to us. So we actually do it once a quarter. Or really before COVID, we were doing it once every 6 months. Because we actually do find that there is a big change to our processes, specifically our internal cohort designs, especially with domain changes. And I actually saw this, like there are specific codes, like because we are looking at like very specific disease states, if one code switches a domain, it actually affects everything downstream. I forget what I saw this with, but I think it had something to do with like kidney codes, where like something was a condition and then it moved to procedure, and then like the person went from like 1,500 patients in their cohort to like 200 patients in their cohort. And so we actually see that quite a lot when we do vocab updates. Not that it's wrong. This is actually coming from, SNOMED themselves and, UMLS, and like people actually own these vocabularies are changing those domains. The vocabulary team isn't just doing it on a whim. But we found that it does impact our processes. So there's a tool out on GitHub, in the OHDSI GitHub, called Tantalus. Anthony, can you drop that link in the chat for me? So this, Anthony was instrumental in helping to develop this, and it helps us really understand what actually went into a vocabulary change. So how many concepts changed domains, what they were, and you can actually link it to your CDM to tell you how many records are actually affected by that change. And there's a couple other changes too. It's not just domain, but at least for us, this just gives us like a high level understanding of what may have changed and where we may see differences in our cohorts. Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
So given the vocabulary discussion that Claire's talking about, what I would say is if you want to operate in an incremental load environment, what I would say is while you're incrementing, I would keep on the same vocabulary. And then I would suggest that like maybe periodically, like on the half years or on the full years, to say, I'm going to adopt a new vocabulary and do a full reload. Now, you say that you have 3 million patients, and obviously those patients could be very, like, depending on your system, could be pulling across a lot of measurement values. So there could be a lot of bulk in there. But 3 million, I would say you probably could make infrastructure changes or code improvements that probably could make it a little bit more reasonable. Like a 3 million patient mark is not like massive.
Well, we have a lot of, it's the measurement data that we're keep in mind, we're going back like almost 20 years here.
Yeah. So
yeah, and like when we update the vocabulary, it's because we're part of the All of Us program, so it's like dependent on when they're gonna update theirs. So I mean, if we had more freedom in that respect, yeah, that would be great.
I think, didn't Don Torok and those guys used to do incremental in the market scan builds that they did? But I think the problem is when they were doing that, the vocabularies didn't augment as quickly. So I don't know if there was kind of that, like, how do you handle this? Because the problem you get into with the vocabulary changes is like physically records need to then move.
Yeah.
And it gets a little bit difficult to manage that. Like I would argument like the update of a record is more expensive in the long run than a full reload. Like, the accumulation of all the updates you'd have to do.
Well, the problem is like we don't even like in the All of Us, we're even like we're having issues even with like handling for a small population. Like right now, it's like less than 2,000, and it's causing a lot of overhead right now. So imagine what's going to happen if we try to like do this amount of patients, and so it's just it's really something that we need like a concrete solution, you know. And I don't know if Tantalus can, you know, tell me what we should be changing. I would have to see. Like,
Yeah. I think like when you compare multiple vocabularies, the differences are not handfuls of differences. It's like millions of differences. And then the difficulty is knowing the importance of those millions of differences. You can have a million differences that are meaningless, like the vocabulary team updated the way that the name looks in the CDM. So who cares? Like concept
yeah,
name changed slightly. But you can have a million changes that there are a million domain changes. That's massive, right? Like to Claire's example, I think there was like anemia. SNOMED at one point was like anemia is now a measurement, and like so like that was like a thing for a hot minute. So that would be impactful to your CDM.
well, I think it's more like just, you know, if it's like this vocabulary was released this year and then the
Hmm.
following year, so it's not like we would be going from like one vocabulary 5 years old, but to like 5 years later. But are you saying like there could be like substantial millions of changes from like one vocabulary to 2020 to 2021? Like, would it be that that many records?
I think Erica's meaning just like at the record level. So like one change in the vocab may look like millions of changes on the record, but it's really one change in the name, right, Erica?
Yeah.
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 Well, as long as we know what those are, you know, I think we would just have to work
Mhm.
on doing the appropriate like historical updates. I think what's more difficult is like, yeah, when it changes domains,
Mhm.
with this old data. I think that's harder.
But I do think like you know, spending some cycles of figuring out like where you can s- pull out inefficiencies in the processing.
Mhm.
There could be just simple like ETL infrastructure things that could be changed, or indexings that can be improved upon. You know, like for example, like our builds used to, like our Truven build with the 120 million people, that used to take a week just to run once. Now that becomes unacceptable when you're processing them on the month. So over the years, we've gone it down from a week to like a handful of hours. But
I think
that's
it's
like,
like 6 hours now.
Yeah, because
but
they
that's
want
like
to do it
dead.
daily at our institution.
Hmm?
They want
Yeah.
to do it daily. So
Hmm. They want to do it daily, I think she's saying. So unfortunately, I think we need to stop here. I think we're a couple minutes over. But Lisa, if you want some more help, you know, feel free to reach out to Erica or myself or Melanie or anybody else in this group. And I'm sure Karthik would have some suggestions as well. You can find us all on Teams, and we could try to help you work through and maybe give you some suggestions of what's worked for us at our institutions.
okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks so much, everybody. Reminder, we'll have the recording of this on the community calls page afterwards if you want to go back to anything. So again, thanks to Claire and Melanie for leading this, and to everybody for a really great discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for coming with your questions. Hopefully we can do it again.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
See you all next week.
Have a good.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.